Hello, you are welcome to another edition of Frank Talk on Almond 94.3 FM. On Frank Talk, we discuss topical issues in society. I am Toyese Oyebode. On this edition of Frank Talk, we'll be examining the 1999 transition program, which was facilitated by General Abdulsalami Abubakar, who was at the military head of state then, after the demise of the former military head of state, General Sani Abacha. Former military head of state, General Abdulsalami Abubakar, in his autobiography, which was recently launched, Call of Duty, an autobiography of General Abdulsalami Abubakar, offered fresh insights into the 1999 transition to civilian rule in Nigeria. Abdulsalami offered his account of what transpired at the period and other key historical events that shaped the destiny of the Nigerian state. General Abdulsalami Abubakar launched the book in the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, recently. He reminisced on his commitment to the return to democracy and the writing of a new constitution for the country, which effectively commenced in May 29, 1999. Let me read a portion of the book. It says, initially, there was intense pressure from some of my colleagues, some heads of state in the West African sub-region, and some in the international community that it was too soon to transition to democracy. Surprisingly, there were pressures from some NADECO members too. 2 to 3 months into my administration, some NADECO members realized that I was sincere about the handover dates, and they saw themselves as shortchanged because they were not politicking as they should have done. They felt they had missed the train and wanted to come on board, which made them request more time to get their acts together. General Abubakar said when NADECO came to him requesting an extension, he turned the table on them, demanding that they write a formal letter requesting the extension and call a press conference publicly endorsing the request, which they declined. I promised that if they did that, I would grant an extension, but they never did. I knew they wouldn't. We went ahead with our program. He said some of his military colleagues were also hostile to handing over to civilians, but that he was personally unmoved by any temptation to stay. For me, I was not in any way tempted to stay longer in office. I had made up my mind. By the time I took over the reins of power, the country was on the edge. Note that before the assumption of power of General Abdulsalami Abubakar, the country had been in a climate of uncertainty and tension for 15 years, spanning through military regimes of Buhari Idiagbon, General Ibrahim Babangida, and General Sani Abacha, as well as the 3-month interim national government of Chief Ernest Shonekan. Therefore, succeeding Abacha as the CNC was a baptism of fire for General Abdulsalami Abubakar. Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka, who was exiled during Abacha days, also wrote about his encounter with Abdulsalami Abubakar in the United States after becoming the head of state. In his memoirs, You Must Set Forth at Dawn, I will read from page 508 of the book. Wole Soyinka says, then the messages began to pour in, or more accurately, the same message from multiple directions. The successor, General Abdulsalami Abubakar, himself, former Chief of Defense Staff to the monster I had dubbed Triple D, the diminutive, demented dictator, wanted us to meet. Was this a replay of the Never Never Abacharian dialogue? I consulted with both Nalikon and key members of NADECO. The feeling was unanimous. Go and listen to what he has to say. As if in a beggarly compensation for the now expunged thrill of a sneak return, we prepared for our meeting with Abdulsalami the way we had operated for nearly 4 years, only this time our cautionary moves were not to thwart any danger to ourselves, but to avoid contamination by the new political hangers-on, Nothing that we had inquired into remotely suggested that Abdulsalami was planning an Abacha-style act of treachery on American soil. On the contrary, this general appeared to have read the national and international mood aright. He accepted that it was permitted just the one mission to return the nation to apparent civilian rule and make a graceful exit. How thoroughgoing would be the transfer, how faithfully distanced from a mere surface change of Britain became the primary concern of the organized opposition. So this will form the basis of our conversation at on this program, on this edition of Frank Talk. And to discuss this with me is a veteran journalist who was active with the pen during the military and even at the civilian era. At some point, he was also the chief press secretary to a former sole military administrator in Ekiti, General Atunji Olurin, and also a former principal private secretary to former governor of Ekiti State, Engineer Olusegun Oni. I have on the program Mr. Ayo Akinyemi. Together, we'll be examining the talking points from the transition program of General Abdulsalami Abubakar. Mr. Ayo Akinyemi, it's good to have you on Frank Talk.
Very happy to be here, Toyese.
Let us do a quick comparative analysis. The generals are writing. The former military head of state, General Yakubu Gowon, wrote his book recently, and also prior to that of General Gowon, General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida also wrote his book as well, A Journey in Service, and now General Abdulsalami Abubakar has written his book. The generals are writing. What's your take?
Yes, it is good. The generals are writing, and I'm not surprised they are doing so. And it's good for us to be able to have their own account of how they ruled this country when they had the opportunity to do so. And the generals writing, I believe, is a challenge to those of us who are journalists who took part in the whole episode, and historians too who were involved, who are on the sidelines monitoring events, so that we'll be able to have very rich account of how things were, how things went in those years. I'm happy they have done so. Unfortunately, General Sani Abacha is no longer around
to write his own
account. It will have been so interesting. But I think there should be people who are close to him, who still believe in him, who I believe will still want to identify with him, will be able to say something. I'm happy Mustafa is still alive, and is a person I really respect, because I saw him very closely during the Oputa panel in Lagos, and he was there physically to give account of his own involvement in the disturbances and activities before the demise of his principal at the time. So I think I'm looking forward to having an account from Mustafa, who was then the chief security officer of General Sani Abacha. And I'm waiting to see the reactions of historians too to the content of General Abdulsalami Abubakar's memoirs.
There were swift reactions to the contents of the memoirs of General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida. Criticisms here and there, but it appears it is a different ball game in the situation of the book of General Abdulsalami Abubakar. Is there anything that is missing?
No, it is not unexpected. You see, General Ibrahim Babangida, the first military president we ever had, and I pray it will be the last military president Nigeria will have. Was in the saddle for 8 years. Abubakar was just in the saddle for about a year. You see, from Abacha died on June 8, a Monday, 1998. Abdulsalami took over, and he added over power May 29, 1999. So he was even there for just 11 months. So we wouldn't have been able to have much to say about him. And it was not controversial. So there are some things he did that people still want to react to. But you can't compare a tenure of 8 years with a tenure of 11 months. So the reactions to the memoirs of General Abdulsalami Abubakar could not be as ferocious and as pronounced as the one you have concerning the memoirs of General Babangida. Even from day one, General Babangida had been controversial until his last day in office. So his memoirs cannot attract such reactions that we witnessed after the book was made public.
Now, before we move to the nitty-gritty of the transition program, let's look at the person of General Abdulsalami Abubakar. And so many people will say that he is humble, he has a very calm posture. And are these a part of Professor Wole Soyinka's book, You Must Set Forth at Dawn, which caught my attention. I had to go back to go and read the You Must Set Forth at Dawn again, because Professor Wole Soyinka also wrote about the transition program, because he was very active during the fight for the return of democracy.
He was.
And is that they met after General Abdulsalami Abubakar became the head of state, after he succeeded General Sani Abacha, that they met in the United States. And he says that as further knowledge was obtained of Abacha's plot to get rid of all probable or imaginary obstacles in his bid for self-perpetuation, it emerged that Abdulsalami was himself next for the jump. During interrogation, which routinely involved torture, some of the accused coup plotters had been offered the chance to shorten their agony and even purchase their freedom or survival by implicating Abdulsalami in one of the phantom plots against the Abacha regime. This attempt had commenced. It turned out, right from the interrogations that preceded the trials and convictions of General Dia and others, a Colonel Lawal Gwadabe in particular, once one of Abacha's most trusted collaborators, had undergone horrendous torture in the effort to make him implicate his boss. He was hung upside down, flogged, electrically shocked, had buckets of excrement poured over him. Unfortunately for that colonel, he was, like his master, a devoted client of Marabout's, one of whom sealed Gwadabe's fate by divining that he would one day become Nigeria's head of state. The prophecy came to Abacha's ears, and he promptly took preventive action. Perhaps the Marabout also predicted a like elevation for Abdulsalami. Those Marabouts loved to please. Speculations were pointless with Sani Abacha, however. So, according to Professor Wole Soyinka, General Abdulsalami Abubakar was also a target. General Abdulsalami was the second in command to General Sani Abacha after the incarceration of General Dia. So, what can you say about this?
I cannot doubt the account of Professor Wole Soyinka, because he's a man that I respect, and he doesn't beat about the bush, and he's so sincere and committed to the Nigerian state. With the image he has internationally, and that the image he has built over the years, even from his very early age in life. Remember the issue of 1965 broadcast, the transmission at the Radio Nigeria Ibadan, where he was involved.
Yeah.
See, you cannot just doubt whatever he says. He's a committed Nigerian, a man who believed in Nigeria, who believed in Nigeria, and you never call blue black. So I believe in totality the account in that his book set forth at dawn. And Abdulsalami Abubakar was not in the limelight, really. He was a core professional until he came into the limelight after the sudden demise of General Sani Abacha.
Could it be seen as a threat by Abacha, while Abacha was still holding sway?
You see, you cannot really say exactly what the situation was at the time. But from all indication, one could easily say that General Sani Abacha was a very ruthless military ruler. And I could liken him to the first Emilokon in the military setting, because one would not be able to say categorically what the arrangement was or had been in the military hierarchy. But I think he already saw himself as a successor to General Babangida, because the majority of them were not pleased with the 8 years transition program of General Babangida, because it was such a classical and well-programmed transition that held its politicians at bay, and Nigerians too followed the transition program because he did it in phases. At one point or the other, there was one form of activity for the politicians to battle with. And from the first broadcast of General Babangida, he made it clear, pointedly, that he was ready to hand over power to the politicians. It was so soothing. And again, he released those that were already put in detention by the Buhari-Idiagbon administration. Many politicians were in detention at that time. And there was no single mention in the 20-year rule of the Buhari-Idiagbon regime that they mentioned the issue of handing over power to the civilians. So when IBB now came on board, and from the first major broadcast, he announced the release of those who were in detention and promised that he was going to return the country to civil rule. So he became so endeared to the people and to the politicians. Those who had their relatives released were happy with him. The politicians too were happy with him, that yes, this is a man that will hand over power to them. So local government election, and the way he did it, well programmed. Had the political bureau set up to give him the agenda for the return. There was the Constitutional Driving Committee. There was the Constituent Assembly. So at every stage, there was one form of political activity to really give assurance to the people. We kept them busy. Local government election, then assembly election, governorship election, before the presidential election. So the politicians were busy, and you could remember that even by 1990, I think the governors who were elected, were sworn in. So we had a form of hierarchy. At the federal level, there was the military, and at the state level, local government level, there were elected politicians. And then one thing he did that we lost by the way he truncated the June 12th presidential election was the issue of two-party system. The two-party arrangement was the best for this country because it was a product of research and weighing the past by the Political Bureau, headed by Dr. J.S. Cookie. Because if you look back into our election from 1959 to 79, the two-party arrangement was so clear-cut, and for him to have decreed the two-party arrangement after the politicians having failed to fulfill the requirements for registration as political parties, he just decreed the SDP, Social Democratic Party, and the National Republican Convention, NRC. The SDP a little to the right, then the NRC the SDP a little to the left, the NRC a little to the right. Clear cut. And the government embarked on even building local secretariats for the political parties in all the states and local governments. And so well arranged that if you have SDP secretariat at one end of the city, you have that of NRC miles away at the end of the city on the other side. So the structures are still there, solid structures. So he prepared that grant, and so the politicians were kept busy. But we lost that two-party arrangement, and we are still suffering for it till today. Because the election of June 12 that we still age today are the fairest and the freest was because we had that two-party arrangement.
At that point, the politicians and pro-democracy activists lost the trust in the military transition program,
yes,
and which also dovetailed into that of the regime of General Sani Abacha.
Yeah.
They also did not have trust. And when Abdulsalami Abubakar came on board, it appears that they did not have trust in him initially until later, because he also referenced that but at some point, the NADECO members, according to him, some NADECO members came to him that, he should tarry a bit with that transition program because they were not prepared. So by not trusting Abdulsalami Abubakar at the first instance, was that a costly mistake for pro-democracy activists?
You see, talking about NADECO will cause us to have a recourse into history, because those who are younger than we are and who are not privileged to know what NADECO even means, I think we should offer a sort of education to say, where were we? Where were we coming from? And how did we get to where we are now? See, the incursion of the military into the Nigerian politics was a product of the acrimony between the political parties and leaders of the First Republic. And so sad, we got independence in 1960, and by 1961, 1962, there was already indications towards disharmony among the political leaders before the eventual military incursion of January 15, 1966. And what we are having on ground now is putting a lot of fears into the mind of some observers, that are we not gravitating towards where we are in 62, 63, 64, 65 that led us to 1966. When the Cardinal Zegu, Lieutenant Colonel, military coup of 1966, Nigeria 15 came to be, and the majors, Major Cardinal Zegu, the majors, it was the coup of the majors when the coup failed, and eventually the generals took over. But in an account published by the Ministry of Information at that time, Nigeria Guide to National Military Government, it was reported in that booklet that it was even the civilian that handed over to the military in 1966.
Was not in Wafo Rizu.
Was acting president because Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe had led the country. Was not the president general. You see, in his acceptance speech, when Aguiyi Ironsi, Major General, was asked to take over, in his first speech, okay, maybe we just talk about even how Nwafo Rizu invited the yes, on in the nationwide broadcast at about 11:50 p.m. on January 16, 1960. The coup was in the morning. Nwafo Rizu handed over power to the military. And in part he said, I have tonight been advised by the Council of Ministers that they had come to the unanimous decision voluntarily to hand over the administration of the country to the armed forces of the Republic with immediate effect. All ministers are assured of their personal safety by the new administration. It is my fervent hope that all citizens will give their full cooperation. That was Nwafo Rizu handing over power to General Aguiyi Ironsi, was then picked as the leader. And in his acceptance speech, General Ironsi said, the military government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria wishes to state that it has taken over the interim administration of the Federal Republic of Nigeria following the invitation of the Council of Ministers of the last government for the army to do so. Then he said, for some time now, there have been escalating political disturbances in parts of Nigeria with increasing loss of faith between political parties and between political leaders themselves. This crisis of confidence reached a head during the elections in the Western region in October last year. That was 1965. There were charges by the opposition parties of rigging of the elections and general abuse of power by the regional government in the conduct of the elections. Riots, arson, murder, and looting became widespread in Western Nigeria since October. The situation deteriorated and certain army officers attempted to seize power. That was the beginning of our trouble when the military took over, because the politicians messed up. And for 13 years, from 1960 to 1979, for 13 years thereafter, we were under the military rule. 6 months after the coup, there was another coup. That was July 29, 1966. Then from there, that was when General Gowon took over and was there for 9 years, the longest serving military head of state. In fact, I think he was there more than General Babangida did before there was the coup of July 29 again of 19. What was that? 1976. And while he was away in Kampala for the OAU summit, General Navin Gaba then announced the military takeover.
So there was precedent for distrust.
Yes, even within the military at the time, everybody was anxious to take power. So, though they alleged that there was corruption under the Gowon administration, and then they accused the military, the civilians too, of corruption. But we realized later that even the military governments were more corrupt than the politicians they booted out of power. Because when you look after the one regime was terminated, and the military governors were approved in the states then, only 2 of them were not inducted. Only 2. Bolaji Johnson in Lagos, and the one Oluwole Rotimi here in the old western state. Only 2 out of the 12 military governors at the time, were not found guilty of corruption. So when eventually Babangida came on board after the termination of the Buhari Idi-Agbon regime, because of the hostility towards politicians, as I said earlier on, there was a very warm embrace for General Babangida. So I think maybe one way or the other, they had plotted the successor or successive regime or program for succession among the military. Yes, among the military. That was why I mentioned earlier on that Abacha saw himself as a milocon within the military setting. That was why he championed, I believe, the annulment of the 1993 election, because Babangida has had his own bit. Why will you deny me my own? And because of the rumpus within the military at that time, and when you go to the account of Professor Momoruji, and even the account of Professor Nwosu in his own book, General Babangida was afraid of his life. That if he had handed over to MK Abiola, they might have been eliminated. So he refused to, he buckled down, and that was why he put up the interim national government headed by Shoneko. And because of the influence of Abacha and that administration, he left him behind. Made him the military the defense secretary, the most powerful in the setting after Shoneko. You see, so and when they now got to, I think the regime was challenged. The interim regime was challenged, and the day the court ruled that it hasn't got any solid legal backing for the interim government to be there, it was that very day that Abacha now took over. And one thing about us is that even when Abacha took over, there was jubilation.
Even on the streets?
Yes, there was jubilation.
So thinking that Abacha will hand over power
to MKO. And I think there were reports too that the Abacha regime and the Nadeko people at that time, had a sort of meet and an agreement. I think that was what informed the involvement of the Alhaji Lateef Jakonde and the Babatokpes, in the government of Abacha. And there were a number of civilians too. They are like Alex Ibro, even Dr. Leonard Guruwa, very strong man in a legal luminary, became the Attorney General.
So the Nadeko people and the military also worked hand in hand.
Yeah, with Abacha. You see, and even in between that period, there was clamor, or there were a series of clamor, you see, by the civilian administration that Abacha should take over, terminate the interim government. Because there was time I was trying to do a book on that transition program, and I could remember there was a specific advertisement signed by late I want to remember his first name now, of Agbowoye. He signed that particular advertisement published in the Nana newspaper that Abacha should take over, that the interim regime should be terminated. So the politicians too invited Abacha to terminate the interim administration of Shoneko. At the moment, the court now ruled that the interim government was illegal. He just seized that opportunity to take over.
Then the question now is, did they see the taking over of power by General Sani Abacha as a clear path to handing over to MKO, or was it a betrayal on the part of Nadeko people?
I think Abacha was very, very smart. His deputy was General Ladipo Dia, a Yoruba man. And Dia, was a former governor of Ogun State, military governor of Ogun State. So, and a very warm, amiable gentleman. Very warm, approachable gentleman. You see, so people believe that they have their own there. And I think much are still yet to be told about what happened within that period. That's why I said I think some of the Nadeko leaders who are still alive should be able to give us some insight. I've not read Ayo Akinyemi's book, but I have a feeling he will have made mention of an aspect of what we are discussing now, because it was very, very active in the Nadeko arrangement and also in Afenifere. Because most of them are no longer around. Baba Adebanjo is gone. Olaniwa Ajayi is gone. You see, we still have this record by Professor Wole Soyinka, but there are still key members of them, key members of the Nadeko. You still have Baba General Abdulsalami is still around. I still saw him a while ago when he came for the burial of the mother of Professor Adewale, the former Minister of Health, who is now the High Commissioner Designate for Canada. So people like them, I think we should find a way of probing them to let us know what the situation was at that time. That's why I will not doubt the account of Salami Abubakar that some medical people wanted an extension of the transition program of General Abdulsalami Abubakar. I think he made up his mind not to be in power for too long because he had seen so much. And, he's a very close ally of General Ibrahim Babangida. They are both from Mina and very, very close. And I'm sure they will have been exchanging ideas. So most of those he might have informed his position that let me just give these people the power and go away. So it was more or less a crash transition program.
Crashed transition program.
That was why one is so surprised that
how?
You see, here was a man. The transition program of Muritala Mohammed, which started in 1976, with 1975, yes, with the inauguration of the Constitution Drafting Committee. Eventually, unfortunately, it was toppled about 3 months after. It was toppled about 3 months after, February 13, 1976. I think he inaugurated the Constitution Drafting Committee on Saturday, 18th October, 1975. So his own transition program started then and terminated with Obasanjo in 1979. So it was about 5 years, transition program, 4 or 5 years transition program. Then the Babangida one lasted 8 years. So how can you now just come and say we were going to hand over within a year. So people had lost faith, one, in the transition program. Then two, the politicians were in disarray at that time. Because with the 5 political parties that General Abdulsalami put in place and was already planning to succeed himself. That was why Chibalage described that 5 political parties are the 5 fingers of a leprous hand. So the majority of the politicians then took part in that transition program. So, but some of them stood back.
But could we say that these politicians were in disarray because many of them were part of the agitation for the return of civilian rule?
Yes.
Or, for example, even many of them were part of NADECO.
Yes.
And so NADECO was an organized group,
Yes.
against the military,
Yes.
fighting for the return of democracy.
Yes.
And even many of them who were exiled, they still formed a group as outside of the country. And so was that not a formidable platform for them to transit into a civilian rule and to politic within the transition time frame?
You see, politicians, they have individual interests. It got to a point when it was clear that Abacha wants us to stay put. Members of the political group, especially from the Afenifere, who were in government, were advised to resign from the Abacha government. The Babatokes, the Jakondis, the Onoguruwas, the Alex Bruce, they were advised to leave the government. I think Babatokwe left. I think Jakonde too left. I think Onoguruwa left. Onoguruwa was, I won't say was, his son was killed. And then by the time he even died, was already on a wheelchair. See, so they asked them to resign.
Some said that it was used to send a message to him.
So they resigned. But Abacha was not comfortable that they left his government. So he became hostile to these politicians. You see, so the politicians who are not pleased with the arrangement of the 5 political parties put together by Abacha, were skeptical when Abdulsalami now came on board. So there had to be another political reconfiguration. And those who are in the progressive, so to say, the NADECO people, they were not prepared for it because they already even ostracized some of their members. Because I know of that Toyese, he became a leper, more
because
or less,
of working with Abacha.
And he argued till up to, I think he did a book on his on his role in the Abacha administration. And now I got there. That he consulted with the leaders of Afenifere and those in the progressives. The same thing with Alhaji Jakonde before they took the appointment under General Abacha. Because Mr. Abacha was the Minister for Aviation and Transport. And he was even the last minister that had those two portfolios merged. After him, it was split. Then Alhaji Jakonde was in charge of housing. Alex Ibru was in charge of internal affairs. And Onoguru was the Attorney General. So they held key position in that administration. They were the first minister to be sworn in. I think there was another minister, the 5th one, I can't remember now, maybe the Minister of Finance, I can't remember now. 5 ministers were sworn in on that same day. And by an accident of the fate, I was present at the Dam Barracks on the day they were sworn in. Because at that time, somebody had tipped me to be the CPS to Geradia. You see, and I think it was our brother Tunji Alakmin, who was then in government. He was the PRO for the police at the time. I think maybe he was given the slot to provide somebody for that position. He reached out to a close friend of his, who is my editor in the Study Tribune, Mr. Lamiti. That one I said, well, why not try this? So that day, I took my CV to
the Dambara.
To Egmontunji Alapini, at the Kapsalem building. And there he minted, and he got in touch with the man who was in charge. I think it was General Chijuka, was then the defense information director. So that one now asked me to come to the Dambara. By the time I got to the gate, there were people to lead me into the hall. I already had a seat for me. So I witnessed that swelling in. So eventually I didn't get a job. So
on a lighter note, you will say that by providence you escaped the travails of General Dia, because if you had been the CPS,
because the fellow who got the job eventually, the former editor of Sunday Times, was detained after the
coup allegation
against Dia. You see, so I thank God. Maybe God didn't want me to suffer
in the hands of General Abdulsalami.
So it is quite interesting the way we found ourselves, and we should not forget the fact that the problem we still have today was caused by the military, the instability in the polity, in the political sphere. Because the battle we have now with the presidential system of government started with the transition program of General Abdulsalami Abubakar. At the inauguration of the Constitution Drafting Committee in October 1975, he pointedly asked the body to consider the presidential system of government without any option. We had the parliamentary system before the army takeover of January 1966, which worked perfectly for us. The regions were independent. They controlled their resources. They managed their affairs the way they wanted. Which ruled the Western region was the way Dr. Nnamdi Ezekwe governed the Eastern region. Same with what happened in the northern part of the country, where Ahmadu Bello was the premier. So the regions had their independence. Even the way we were in the Western region, we were even borrowing the center money. You see, and look at the type of development we had in the Western region, were during that period. You see, so, but when General Muhammadu Buhari inaugurated the Constitution Drafting Committee, the 49 men, because Chief Abafewole refused to partake. He was the 50th person, but he declined to serve. Because the chairman of that body was Chief Rotimi Williams, FRA. And the FRA was the Attorney General under Chief Abafewole in the Western region. And the character of Papa. He would not want to serve under a subordinate that was a subordinate over the years. Though the arrangement in the Western region and the cabinet was so superb that the leader didn't see himself as the leader, in the true sense of it. He just saw himself as the first among equals. That was the way Chief Abafewole managed his cabinet in the Western region. So he declined to serve because he said he was not even contacted, that he had an announcement on radio, and a man of principle, he refused to serve. You see, so we had 49. And then in the speech of General Muritala at that occasion, he told them, he said, indeed, the Supreme Military Council is of the opinion that if during the course of your deliberations, and having regard to our disillusion with party politics in the past, you should discover some means by which government can be formed without the involvement of political parties. You should feel free to recommend an executive presidential system of government in which the president and vice president are elected with clearly defined powers and are accountable to the people. We feel that there should be legal provision to ensure that they are brought into office in such a manner so to reflect the federal character of the country. And the choice of members of the cabinet should also be such as to reflect the federal character of the country. You see, so it was made a no-go area. It was affirmed that what we should take next is the presidential system of government, not debated. So here we are today.
Now, in the 1999 Constitution, which was birthed by General Abdulsalami Abubakar, since that 1999 Constitution came to life, there have been criticisms that it was written by the military, and in that indeed it was brought to life by military proclamation. And General Abdulsalami Abubakar in his book debunked that, saying that it was not written by the military, and that there was a panel, a committee that was set up, a 25-member committee headed by Justice Nikki Toby, and that not that they were not even saddled with the responsibility of writing a new constitution from the scratch. That there were 405 memoranda, from Nigerians, that it was overwhelmingly requested that the 1979 Constitution should be adopted, that 95% of the provisions in the 1979 Constitution were adopted by the committee, which came into life through the 1999 Constitution.
It's true. It's absolutely true. Because I have one package in my library that contains the 1963 Constitution, the 1979 Constitution, and the one we have now, before the amendments. If you put the three side by side, they contain only little modifications. Like the general said, note that there was a complete constitution that was done from the scratch. It had been the amendment of the previous constitutions. And I was privileged to cover the Constitutional Assembly 1989 that packaged the 1999 Constitution for the Babangida administration. It was supposed to have handed over earlier. So the 8889 Constitutional Assembly, did the packaging. And I was privileged to be the reporter at the beat for the Sunday Tribune. Though at that time I was the assistant editor of the national newspaper. But my editor-in-chief felt I would give the right deserved coverage to that session. So, no constitution was written from the scratch. The 1999 constitution was not written from the scratch. Even the one we debated in the 18, that was debated in the 88-89 Constitutional Assembly, that was supposed to have been the constitution for the transition if the June 12 election had not been annulled. There could just be a little modification in the totality of the one that was presented as the 1999 Constitution. So the politicians have been saying that it was a military constitution. There was never a military constitution. Even the civilians were involved in the packaging. We mentioned the 1976 Constitutional Drafting Committee headed by Chief F.R. Williams. Then the 1889 Constitutional Assembly that I was privileged to cover. The chairman was Justice Anyagolu. The secretary was Baba Gana Kingibe. And we have other people, politicians. Some were elected, some were nominated. And one peculiar picture within that Constituent Assembly was that the government allowed even civil servants to contest for that election into the assembly. It was one of the forums that Abubakar was trying to build new breed politicians. So he allowed these civil servants to be part of the elected members of the assembly.
But the old guys kicked against it.
So were nominated. But they were there in the assembly. So he thought it would be a grant for the new ones to emerge. Because when he eventually, in part of his speech, even at the inauguration of the two-party system, I was there too, in Abuja. There was a particular sentence in that his speech where the issue of new breed politicians and old breed politicians arose. He said the same vegetation cannot remain in the same environment for life. Therefore, these politicians who have been recycling themselves should have determination of their existence, that the new ones should come on board. That was the biggest of the conundrum of new breed, old breed politicians. You know, he even made attempts to ban some category of politicians.
He banned them, yes, or they kicked against
when
it.
He had to
release them,
to allow them. And even when the first primaries that were conducted by the political parties then, and it seemed at that point that the late General Abdulsalami was going to emerge as the leading contender for the presidency, and some other developments too. The primaries then was cancelled. So that was the beginning of the feelings that politicians had concerning the transition program. You see, so when that happened, you know, there was a point that some of these old politicians were even arrested. The Jacondes, even the Obade, the Bulls, they were arrested, about 13 of them. And the feelings then was that they would be able to meet among themselves and resolve who will lead them in the next political arrangement. But they failed. I could remember I did a very good comprehensive article on that development. You see, so the politicians, we have ourselves to blame for what we have on hand now. Because of selfish interests.
Now, the 1999 Constitution has been facing a huge criticism. Some elders in the country have been going around calling for the total abolishment of the 1999 Constitution, that we need a new Constitution. In fact, some of them are saying that the 1963 Constitution should be put into effect, that is what can bring the desired development in the country. What's your take before we round off?
Yeah. Pointedly, I would say the Constitution is not our problem. But the politicians, the judiciary, the legislators to our politicians, even the way we have the Constitution today, do we respect the provision of the Constitution to the letters? No. You see, the Constitution is not the problem. So there are some aspects of our Constitution that needs to be reviewed. Take for instance, look at this cross-carpeting or defection by politicians. I would have loved the proviso that if you were elected on a platform, you should not go to another political platform. That proviso should be removed in case, so that it should be solid. Once you leave, you lose your seat. See the way the present government is manipulating the Constitution. The judiciary will say today that the governor who is elected on the platform of a political party is not the owner of the mandate. That the mandate belongs to the political party. Cite the issue of Rotimi Amechi, and Silva Omeya,
Celestine
Omeya, in Rivers State election of 2007. The court affirmed that the mandate belongs to the party, not to the individual. That was why Omeya had to be sacked by the court after about 19 months in office. The same court now will allow another governor to just go to another political party, taking the mandate of the other party to it. You see, the fact that there is a crisis in a political party, take for instance, if I have a house now inherited by 3 of us, and if there is crisis and you are a tenant in that house, so if there is crisis between me and my siblings, does that make the property yours? That's just an analogy. So if there is crisis in my political party, if there is crisis in my political party, should I, because of that, now take the mandate of that party to another party? We look at the issue of deputy governors. The deputy governors have immunity. See the way the governors have been dealing with them. I believe there are some aspects of our constitution that need to be reviewed. But if for me today, I want a reversal to the old parliamentary system, but can it be done? It can only be done constitutionally. But those people in charge that wants to have a change in the political structure from which are benefiting. So the constitution is not the problem. Though there are some areas that needs to be visited and restructured to allow independence for the states, to take a look at the list, the exclusive legislative list and concurrent legislative list, to allow the states to manage their resources. So the state police thing, I think, is a step towards restructuring. We need to restructure this country so that there will be a measure of dependence for the governors and the states.
All right. Thank you very much, sir, for your time, for featuring on the program.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I've been discussing with Mr. Ayo Akinyemi. I've been taking a holistic look at the 1999 Constitution, at the build-up to it, vis-a-vis at the autobiography of General Abdulsalami Abubakar, who facilitated the transition to the 1999 civilian rule that we are still practicing up till today. Thank you very much for joining the program. I am Toyese Oyebode. Next Saturday is another time on the program at 11 a.m. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.